Let's get into the Victorian budget because announced today the Victorian government will spend $49 billion over the next 4 years in an effort to rescue the state's economy from the self-inflicted aspects, the worst of, the nation's lockdown. Now, the budget handed down today by the Treasurer Tim Pallas will see the government's net debt levels reach close to $155 billion within the next 3 years, more than 28% of Victoria's total economic output. Meanwhile, the state is forecasting a record $23.3 billion deficit. Victoria's opposition leader, Michael O'Brien, joins me now from Melbourne. Michael, you have been a treasurer before in state government. In your opinion, who are the big winners and losers of this budget?
Good evening, Peter. Look, the big losers are taxpayers. The big losers are Victorians who want to get work. We've got a jobs crisis in Victoria at the moment. 1 in 5 Victorians who are of working age either are out of a job or can't get enough hours. So that's a jobs crisis. Under this budget that's been brought down today, Victoria will continue to have higher than average unemployment for each of the next 4 years. So effectively, Andrews has just run up the white flag on jobs. He says, well, if you're not wearing a hard hat, we're not going to do anything for you. If you're a small business person, if you're a sole trader, we're not going to do anything for you. So I think taxpayers are the big losers because they're going to have to pay back that $155 billion of debt. They're going to have to pay that $4 billion of interest every year. And people who want to find work, who want to get back to work, back in business, they've also missed out.
When he came to power when he took office, not at the last election, when he took office, Victoria's debt was just $33 billion. It's now projected, as we said, to $155 billion over the forward estimates, or 30%, or 28.7 or whatever it is, of state GDP. I know the argument that debt is cheap, but it won't be cheap forever, and the state's actually got to find a way to increase growth in order to pay it back or increase taxes. Are you concerned that there isn't enough economic horsepower in this budget? A lot of spending, but I can't see where the growth's coming from, Michael O'Brien.
Look, there's no structural reform here. There's no productivity. This is just throwing money at the wall. It's fire hose economics, Peter. The government is just throwing money out there, hoping that some of it sticks and hoping that it can actually deliver an outcome. But its own budget forecast indicate that's just not happening. What worries me as a former treasurer is our debt is now 50%, $50 billion more than New South Wales will be. Now, New South Wales, it's a bigger state, it's a bigger economy, and yet our debt will be so much larger. And as I say, the cost of servicing that debt, even with these low interest rates, you're still looking at $4 billion a year. Now, that's the equivalent of 4 Royal Children's hospitals we now can't build because we're going to have to pay the interest on the Labor Party's debt. And to me, as a Victorian, as a former treasurer, I just think we've been put in a very financially exposed position. This guy, Andrews, he makes the Kane-Kerner government look like fiscal Scrooges.
There's a lot of concern, $1.6 billion for so-called clean energy jobs. There's not a lot of specificity there. And this massive taxpayer-funded program to put heating and cooling units in people's homes and in housing commission blocks. Where is that sort of money going? And what's the argument behind it when you've got small business on its knees in Victoria?
Well, Peter, of course, this is the government that created Victoria's high energy prices. The government tripled the tax on brown coal. It forced Hazelwood out of business. It took 25% of Victoria's power out of the grid, which led to a massive increase in prices, 85% increase in wholesale prices. So the same government that caused high power prices in Victoria now says we've got the solution to your problems. And that is individually go into people's homes and put in energy efficient products. Well, how about just getting a reliable, safe and cheap form of energy that Victoria used to have? Because that's what made Victoria the manufacturing state. We've now given up that title because we have got unreliable and increasingly unaffordable energy. This government is just approaching this from the wrong way.
I looked at the case. I mean, I supported them at the time, the rail level crossings being removed, but those costs there have blown out. They've all blown out to $250 million each, so they've increased 3 times over since the original forecast of $80 million. We also see today that they've dumped the annual major project updates. We can't tell where the projects are now over budget. They were over budget. We expect they'll be worse come out of COVID, but of course that's not being disclosed today. How concerned are you about the smoke and mirrors in these numbers?
Oh, Peter, it's a massive cover-up. One of the most important budget papers that we've had going back a decade has been Budget Paper 4. That sets out what's happening with all the capital projects. It tells you how much they're costing and when they're going to be ready. And that kept governments honest and it kept the public informed. And what happened today is that the Labor Party just simply said, we're not going to produce this budget paper. We're going to keep you in the dark. Now, the trouble is, as you point out, this government's got a track record. They can't manage projects. They can't manage money. Every single major project they've tried to do, they've either blown the budget, blown out the timeline, or both. And now they're threatening to do suburban rail loops, $150 billion, northeast links, $15–20 billion, and they're not even prepared to be honest with Victorians about how much they're going to cost or when they're going to be ready. So I think as a Victorian, I'm very concerned, not just for my future, but for the next generation, because they'll be the ones paying for this government's mistakes.
What about the spin, though? Because we saw today the announcement that the Royal Melbourne Hospital, huge hospital, it would be in the ballpark of, say, $1.5 to $2 billion to rebuild. That was the cost of the Royal Adelaide Hospital, so I know those hospital costs well. $10 million was on the table, which is a scoping study, not even that probably. This is the sort of stuff I think that gets under people's skin because this is not demonstrable, real structural improvements. This is just, this is a headline.
It's a headline without a headline, Peter. That's the way this Labor Party operates. Constantly trying to buy headlines, promising delivery and never actually getting it done. Now, we do need to rebuild some of our hospitals. The Alfred Hospital in Melbourne's southeast needs a rebuild. We've got a growing population down in Warragul. They desperately need a new West Gippsland hospital. But this government is more interested in just chasing headlines than actually building real projects that will actually help real Victorians. I think Victorians are sick of the spin. They just want to see a government that's focused on recovery, on jobs and practical projects that will get it done.
Just before we go, we know the new quarantine system starts up on the 7th of December. Have you, I'm dubious that they've learned from the mistakes. Have you had a briefing on how the new system will work?
We haven't, Peter. Look, this is a government that doesn't got no interest in consulting with the opposition or keeping us informed. I've previously raised my real concerns that this government will just get this wrong. We've gone through a second wave because of the incompetence of Labor over hotel quarantine and over contact tracing. Who says that they've learned from their mistakes? They still won't bring the ADF in. They still won't bring Victoria Police in. They still have been using untrained private security guards for hotel quarantine. If the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over again and expecting a different result, then we've got real reason to be worried about the sanity of this government when it comes to hotel quarantine.
Spot on. I tell you, I'm moving to New South Wales if it happens again down here, a lockdown like we had before. Michael O'Brien, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Peter.